Hello, friends. How are you all? On June 6th, 1982, a well-known Lebanese poet stood quietly on the balcony of his home in Beirut. He looked out over the city one last time, a city he loved deeply, a city that once symbolized beauty, freedom, and intellectual life. For a few moments, he simply stood there, observing the streets, the buildings, and the skyline that had once been full of life and energy. Then, in a moment that would mark both a personal and symbolic tragedy, he lifted his hunting rifle, placed its barrel against his head, and pulled the trigger. A loud gunshot echoed through the air. With that single shot, the poet died. But in many ways, something else died with him as well. The Beirut he loved, the Beirut that once existed as a cultural paradise in the Arab world. Because the city he was leaving behind was no longer the same. It was transforming into something very different, a place where fear, conflict, and ideological control would soon dominate everyday life, a place where women would be pressured and even financially encouraged to adopt strict forms of veiling, a place where memories of war would overshadow creativity and intellectual freedom, and a place where a powerful new organization, Hezbollah, would soon emerge. The question is, why did this poet take such a drastic step? Why would a man who loved his city so deeply choose to end his own life? One of the major reasons was the shock he experienced during the Israeli invasion of Lebanon in 1982. Hundreds of Israeli Merkava tanks entered Lebanese territory and advanced toward Beirut. The scale, speed, and intensity of this military operation were overwhelming. For a 63-year-old intellectual who believed in ideals like Arab unity and nationalism, this was not just a political event. It was a deeply personal, emotional blow. He had always believed that Arab nations, despite their differences, would stand together when faced with a common enemy. He believed that there would be solidarity, resistance, and collective action. But when the invasion happened, that unity did not appear. No major Arab country stepped forward in a decisive way to stop the attack. This reality shattered him. He reportedly expressed his frustration and despair by asking, "Where are the leaders? Where are those who were supposed to stand for us? How can I carry this burden of shame on my own?" These were not just words. They reflected a deep sense of betrayal and hopelessness. However, this was only part of the story. The true reason behind his suicide was much larger and more complex. It was the realization that the entire Muslim world, and Lebanon in particular, was undergoing a transformation that would change its identity, its culture, and its future. Lebanon had once been very different. For many years, it was known as a relatively peaceful and neutral country. Unlike many of its neighbors, it did not actively involve itself in major regional conflicts. It had a reputation for openness, diversity, and coexistence. Because of this, Beirut became a unique center of culture and intellectual life. There was very little censorship. Writers, poets, journalists, and thinkers could express their ideas freely. This freedom attracted intellectuals not just from the Arab world, but from across the globe. At a time when many countries were under strict military rule, such as Pakistan under General Zia-ul-Haq, Chile under Augusto Pinochet, and others, Beirut stood out as a rare space of openness and creativity. For many, it felt like an oasis in a desert of repression. This is why prominent figures like Ahmed Fouiz and many other writers and intellectuals chose to come and live in Beirut. Cafes, restaurants, and public spaces in areas like Hamra were filled with discussions, debates, and artistic expression. There was a sense of vibrancy and intellectual energy in the air. But beneath this surface, tensions were slowly building. Lebanon's population was divided into major religious groups: Shia Muslims, Sunni Muslims, and Christians. Over time, political and social competition between these groups began to intensify. By the 1970s, these tensions had started to turn into conflict. Although it initially appeared limited, it gradually evolved into a form of internal instability that weakened the state's authority. As the internal situation deteriorated, external actors began to take advantage of Lebanon's weakness. One of the most significant among them was the Palestine Liberation Organization, PLO, led by Yasser Arafat. After being expelled from Jordan following the events known as Black September, the PLO relocated its base to Lebanon. From there, it continued its struggle against Israel. The PLO established training camps, particularly in southern Lebanon, near the Israeli border. These camps were used to train fighters and launch operations. This development effectively turned Lebanon into a frontline state in the Arab-Israeli conflict. Then came another major turning point, the Iranian Revolution of 1979. This revolution not only changed Iran internally, but also had a profound impact on the wider region. The new Iranian leadership aimed to export its revolutionary ideology beyond its borders. Lebanon, with its internal divisions and Shia population, became a key target. At the same time, tensions between Iran and the PLO began to emerge. While the PLO followed a more secular, nationalist approach, Iran's new leadership promoted a religious, ideological framework for resistance. These differences led to a kind of rivalry. Iran wanted influence in Lebanon, but it needed a local force that aligned with its vision. This opportunity came in 1982, when Israel launched its invasion of Lebanon to eliminate the PLO presence. It succeeded in pushing the organization out of Beirut. Yasser Arafat and thousands of his fighters were forced to leave the country. This created a power vacuum, and Iran moved quickly to fill it. Iranian Revolutionary Guard arrived in Syria and then entered Lebanon, particularly focusing on areas with Shia populations. However, instead of directly engaging in large-scale battles with Israel, their strategy was different. They focused on reshaping society. They began spreading their ideology, promoting religious practices, and encouraging a new form of identity based on resistance and faith. In some areas, changes happened very rapidly. Posters of Iranian leaders appeared on walls. Religious messaging was broadcast through loudspeakers. Social norms began to shift. Women were encouraged, and in some cases pressured, to adopt stricter forms of dress. Financial incentives were reportedly offered to families to support these changes. At the same time, young men were recruited and trained. Training camps were established where fighters learned how to use weapons, conduct guerrilla warfare, and carry out operations against Israeli forces. Gradually, these efforts led to the formation of a new organization. This organization would become known as Hezbollah, meaning Party of God. Hezbollah adopted Iran's ideological framework and recognized Ayatollah Khomeini as its spiritual leader. Over time, it grew stronger and more organized. What began as a small movement eventually became one of the most powerful non-state actors in the region. And this transformation changed Lebanon permanently. The country that was once known for its openness, diversity, and intellectual life became deeply entangled in conflict, militancy, and ideological struggle. For those who had loved the old Beirut, the city of freedom, culture, and ideas, this change was heartbreaking. For that poet standing on his balcony in 1982, it was unbearable, because he was not just witnessing a military invasion. He was witnessing the end of an era. And that is why, in that moment of despair, he chose to end his life.